So my name's Katrina Elder. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders past and I'm a white woman with brown hair, and I'm wearing my favorite French glasses today for my myopia. So I've been asked to give us a little introduction to intersectionality as an approach. So my role at Our Watch is practice lead intersectionality, and actually, as Mike was talking about, I do a lot of work with our Changing the Picture resource, which is the prevention of violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. All right, so next slide, thanks. All right, so why intersectionality? Intersectionality is both a lived experience and a theory that lots of organizations use outside of Our Watch, but we are committed to using intersectionality here because it's a really profound way of understanding, as we do work about change and in particular prevention, to figuring out who we are as workers and our place in the community, but also if you're just a person moving through the world, understanding how it is that you experience your life in both its privilege and its marginalization. It's a way of linking that individual story or experience with the structural issues, with policies, practices, laws, and they can be things that lead to, as I said, either privilege or discrimination. And the other really powerful thing about an intersectional approach is the idea of visibility. So it actually works to make what can often be invisible, both privilege and discrimination, visible. And the image that you see here is the Our Watch figure for helping people work with the idea of discrimination. I call this person ribbon person, and we can unpack that image a bit later. Thanks. All right, now, as I said, one of the really powerful things about intersectionality and why we use this is that it makes links between who we are in the world, and that can be who we are in relation to our gender, our ethnicity, our race, our class, where we live, our education levels, ability, disability, and it links those experiences with the idea of power, which is the idea of either having power and privilege or not having access to power and privilege, or the mixture of both of those things. So that's why, that's part of the power of intersectionality, is it's about power. Thanks. So why do we need intersectionality? As you probably know, one of the key theoreticians or people who started to use the idea of intersectionality was a legal scholar from the United States called Kimberly Crenshaw. And Kimberly Crenshaw started to think about intersectionality because what she noticed was that even in worlds where we are trying to think about structural inequality, we're trying to think about power and its impact, that there often is stuff that people who are trying to make change miss, right? So this is a quote from Crenshaw, where she says, intersectionality originally developed on behalf of Black women. The term brought to light the invisibility of many women within groups that claim them as members, but often fail to represent them. So we're thinking about our work today, the Practice Forum on Sexual Harassment. We're all people who come here with the idea that we want to make the world a better place, and our aim is to end particular aspects of inequality. But Crenshaw just notices that even as we actively aim to do that, there can be invisibilities that we don't see ourselves. If you're a person who is privileged, you may not see marginalizations, or there might be structures, for example, particular policies or laws that make it really hard for those changes to take place. Thanks. Next one. All right, so this is just another quote from Crenshaw to give this idea about why intersectionality, and it's the idea that one size does not fit all. And so again, to quote her, she says, oops, backwards. She says, sexism isn't a one-size-fits-all phenomenon. It does not happen to treat Black and white women the same. Right? So that's just for the next few minutes, we'll just unpack how some of the predominance of a one-size-fits-all approach still happens, even as we know that there's complexities. Right? Thanks, Mike. Next one. All right. So the first thing when thinking about and doing intersectionality, some of this will be so obvious because, as I said, we all live intersectional lives, but we're just going to take it a bit further to the theory. So all our lives are intersectional. All of us, as we move through the world, as we just exist, we can think of the different aspects that make up who we are. So we might understand ourselves in terms of our age, our political affiliation, our class, our race, ethnicity, religion. So all of these, which I would call identity categories, come together to make up who we are. That's pretty basic understanding of how we live. Thanks. But what happens is that in our aims to make worlds better, to get rid of inequality, we'll often have laws, policies, attitudes that can both aim to make particular types of people's lives better, or policies, laws that can actually discriminate, right? So those individual experiences that we have can get translated into structural or community understandings of how the world works, all right? So we can understand ourselves as, say, it's a person who earns a particular level of income, or it's a particular set of cultural attributes, which might identify for ourselves as working class. But that neutral idea of working classes can get translated through policies, beliefs, laws into something negative, into something which is about exclusion. And the same with things like age, one's cultural, ethnic, or racial identity, one's gender. So all of our understandings of who we are get translated into attitudes, policies, and beliefs. And that's where it's important that we do intersectional work, because those individual lives, the individual ways to experience our lives, are spaces of privilege or spaces of marginalization. Thanks. So what intersectionality is asking us to do is to think about the multiple impacts of privilege or discrimination. So when we're thinking about sexual harassment, we think, okay, we know from the evidence that sexual harassment is something that is predominantly experienced negatively by women. But if we're going to maximize the impact we have in improving the workplace for women, or for let's just say for women, then we need to make sure that we understand the complexity, the mix of lives that are included in the category women, right? So we can't just say we're doing work around gender. We need to think, okay, when we're doing work around sexual harassment, what happens if you're a person who identifies as a woman, but also moves through the world as somebody who is Indigenous? Or what about if you identify as a woman, but you also are not cis-normative, you identify as a trans woman? So intersectionality invites us to make sure that we are always thinking about the complexity of the group that makes up women in our case. So in some ways, what it does then is that intersectionality asks us to do something different from diversity. So diversity will just keep on using multiple single categories. Intersectionality asks us, as it says in the title, to think about the complexity, the mix, the space where a person is on the receiving end of multiple discriminations or multiple privileges or a mixture. So just to give you an example of intersectionality, next slide. So if you're thinking about discrimination in terms of gender and race, if you start to use that intersectional approach, which is let's not just use one category, you can see that, for example, a white woman in the workplace might be on the receiving end of gender discrimination, but racial privilege. An African American man might be on the receiving end of some gender privilege, but discrimination in terms of their racial identity. In the context of Australia, a Torres Strait Islander woman would be likely to be on the receiving end of this discrimination in terms of both both gender and race, right? So an intersectional approach makes that compounding discrimination for this particular group of women visible and it also makes spaces of privilege visible. Right, I'm going to end there, and I hope that's a useful introduction to this idea of intersectionality. Thanks, Mike.